Hey, folks, and welcome into the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. A very busy weekend for Texas football across all fronts. So, we've brought back the Horns 24/7 quad box to help get you caught up to speed and hear what the best in the business have to say about what happened over the weekend. Eric Henry, Chip Brown, and Jeff Howe alongside me. Guys, thanks for being here. Eric, we're going to start here with you with Texas kind of transitioning to a new wide receiver room here in 2024. Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell heading to the professional levels. So Steve Sarkisian kind of forced to reload in that room, and boy, did they over the weekend, landing Isaiah Bond, the transfer wide receiver from Alabama. He was 24/7 Sports' number 2 overall portal prospect, the number 1 ranked wide receiver. And that's the second transfer wide receiver the Longhorns have gotten. Remember, they also have Matthew Golden coming in from Houston, plus 5-star wide receiver Ryan Wingo from the high school ranks, guys like Jonte Cook already on the roster. Eric, overall, what do you make of how the Longhorns have reloaded at that skill position out wide at wide receiver?
Tommy, let's start there. The fact that you're using the word reload, not necessarily that you thought it was going to be a rebuild, right? You obviously had a good recruiting class last year with Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, Ryan Niblett. Obviously, of that trio, Jonte got the most playing time this year as a true freshman, but DeAndre Moore and Ryan Niblett weren't far behind. When you spoke with Steve Sarkisian during the season, he talked about the fact that it just was a byproduct of how deep that receiver room was that was keeping some of those younger guys off the field. But then you follow that up and you get, a guy like a Ryan Wingo this year's class. And then you follow up and get, a kid from Houston and Matt Golden, someone who has just a good level of college football experience, which you think is probably needed, especially with those young guys on the roster. It's a kid who scored 2 touchdowns against the Horns when Texas and Houston met earlier this year. But there's no doubt that the Isaiah Bond, that is that move, it's a steal of, almost epic proportions, Tommy. Of course, that move precipitated by Nick Saban's retirement, right? And players having the ability to get out that third day window. But the reason why this move is so huge is you ask Sark, speed. It comes down to sheer speed. He is someone who, even going back to his USC days, even prior to that with Washington, has said, if I can get speed on offense, specifically at perimeter, the receivers, it just opens up so much more. And another thing, when you take a look at Isaiah Bond, a player who, caught 45 balls this year for just under 700 yards and 4 touchdowns, was an excellent downfield receiver. I wrote in the piece for Horns 24/7 today, I felt like this gives Texas and Steve Sarkisian that true downfield threat that they've wanted really since the entire time that Sark got here, since 2021. Obviously, Xavier Worthy has the speed to take the top off the defense, but hasn't been the most efficient deep ball receiver. Some of that, of course, goes when you juxtapose Jalen Milroe to Quinn Yates as far as deep ball throwers. But when you accumulate just the level of talent, again, with Wingo and Cook and all these guys, this is not a rebuild of the receiver room. It is a reload. So just got to take a look at the move from that perspective. And the final thing, Tommy, before I pass it back to you, that I think you love about a guy like Bond in conjunction with Matt Golden is it's almost positionless. You don't have guys anymore who are just going to be locked into being on the outside or locked into being in the slot. Matt Golden, Isaiah Bond, both played this year about 50-50 to 60-40 in terms of the snaps, inside versus outside. So you can move those guys around. Just gives you additional versatility in the way you can use those receivers like chess pieces. And when you give an offensive play caller like Steve Sarkisian that level of versatility, it just kind of opens up, in my mind, even greater possibilities for this offense.
He likes speed and he likes versatility, and they'll certainly need both of those things as they transition to the SEC. Going to bring Chip in here now to talk about Steve Sarkisian. After the Sugar Bowl loss, it kind of seemed like a matter of when and not necessarily if when it comes to Steve Sarkisian's contract and whether or not he would be extended. That came on Saturday. The Longhorns add 4 more years to his deal. Numbers-wise, not really sure what he's making, but you have to think a substantial amount more. Texas also fighting off Alabama to, trying to steal Steve Sarkisian away after Nick Saban retired. Chip, how important was it for Texas to keep Sarkisian around after the season that they've had? And, maybe what was his interest level like in that Alabama job?
Well, it's enormous that Steve Sarkisian has re-upped with Texas because, Texas took a chance on Steve Sarkisian to be a head coach again after being a head coach at Washington and USC, losing the USC job, and then his odyssey that took him to Alabama as an analyst in 2016 and returning to Alabama in 2019 and 2020 when he helped Alabama win the national championship. The timing could not have been better. Nick Saban's retirement could not have been better timing for Steve Sarkisian in terms of re-upping with Texas. And I'll be surprised if he's not. We've got open records requests in because, Texas likes for people to do that. So I'll be surprised if he's not at 10 million, and that will put him top 5 in college football. You've got Nick Saban, who just retired. Obviously, he was at 11.4. Dabo's at 10.9. Kirby Smart at 10.7. Ryan Day at Ohio State, 10.27. And Brian Kelly at 9.975 million per year. So that the 10 million mark would put Sark right there in the top 5. So, but look, I think Texas was smart. They didn't go crazy on the extension by adding 4 years. They didn't, tear it up and go with a 10-year, $100 million deal. They kept it, reasonable, and they believe in Steve Sarkisian because he's laid out a plan for them that attracted the Texas leaders, Jay Hartzell, Chris Del Conte, Kevin Eltife, the Regents chair, and hiring Steve Sarkisian. They feel like he has absolutely adhered to that plan. And so, now we see, the coaches, the assistant coaches are going to get new contracts as well. So we'll have all kinds of stuff to follow up on here, but this is a big move because I do believe there was contact from Alabama to Steve Sarkisian, and we know how sentimental Steve Sarkisian feels about Nick Saban. If Nick Saban was part of the recruitment, that's a tough heartstrings situation for Steve Sarkisian, who got his second chance at Alabama, also had life-saving heart surgery there because Nick Saban suggests that his assistant coaches get the executive physical, a more strenuous physical that detected an aneurysm in Steve Sarkisian's heart and required emergency open heart surgery in the summer of 2020. So, yeah, I think it was kind of a harrowing 12 hours there after the retirement of Nick Saban, but Texas still has its man.
Still have his man, and they're still adding to the staff. They added Johnny Nansen from Arizona, and speaking of Arizona, we'll bring in Jeff Howe to add in another very important staff member to this Texas staff, and a guy who knows Austin very well. He was the defensive backs coach from 2001 to 2013. Dwayne Akina makes his return to the 40 acres, and Jeff, this seems like a really big addition for Texas, especially considering how at sometimes poor the defensive back play was for the Longhorns in 2023, and knowing that Steve Sarkisian and the staff want to make it a position of strength heading into 2024. We've seen how they've recruited both in the high school ranks and in the transfer portal. What does Akina's return to Texas mean for this secondary going into their first year in the SEC?
Yeah, you just mentioned one of the big things, Tommy, with the secondary. Yes, it performed, didn't perform up to expectations in 2023, but with the way they've recruited, we saw Malik Muhammad this year, Kobe Black, Xavier Filsaime, Wardell Mack. Those guys are going to be mid-year transfers. You got Andrew Makuba out of the transfer portal. You get Jade Baron back. So you've got the pieces in the secondary to be really good in your first year in the SEC. What I think Dwayne Akina helps with is he's going to help you maximize that talent, and it's going to be different than the first time he was at Texas. In an analyst role, you can only do so much, but I think people need to remember Coach Akina's 67, so the recruiting grind and everything you do as an assistant coach, maybe not for him at this point in his life, this point in his career, but I think maybe to where he can get back to helping Terry Joseph Joseph game plan, helping teach a little bit. I think that's right up his wheelhouse. So you talk to guys that played for Dwayne Akina, they'll tell you, the reason why their knowledge base of football is so expansive is because they played for Dwayne Akina, just in terms of how they see the game, how they understand the game. So anytime you can add somebody with his experience level at Texas is huge. You think about Tommy, when he got to Texas in 2001, again, he inherited a really talented secondary, and all members of that secondary, his first season at Texas, Rod Babers and Quentin Jammer at the corners, and then Ahmad Brooks and Nathan Vasher at the safeties. All four of those guys play in the National Football League. Quentin Jammer was the first of 6 first-round picks Dwayne Akina coached in the secondary, 2 Jim Thorpe Award winners, and that's not even counting guys, like a Shockey Brown, Curtis Brown. You think back to a guy like Terrell Brown, a Cedric Griffin. Tons of NFL guys played for Dwayne Akina that came through Texas. He had a real knack at figuring out. Maybe not even if a guy played defensive back at the high school level. That's a little more specialized now. But back then, he was taking guys that were high school running backs or quarterbacks. Just was able to understand kind of tools that it took to succeed in the secondary. So he can also be an ear for Terry Joseph and Pete Kwiatkowski from an evaluation standpoint. But the big overarching theme for me with Dwayne Akina coming back, I haven't in my lifetime seen a Texas defense that was able to tie the front end with the back end, tie fronts with coverages, the way those 3 years Texas played defense under Will Muschamp, when Will Muschamp was the defensive coordinator from 2008 to 2010, the way his front and Dwayne Akina's secondary meshed. And yes, they had a ton of NFL talent come through Texas at the time, but it was seamless in the way the front end and the back end worked. And we've just seen it kind of be hit or miss too often at Texas through the first 3 years of Pete Kwiatkowski. Don't get me wrong, the defense made incredible strides from year 1 to year 2 and even year 2 to year 3. When you finish in the top 10 in the country and third down defense, red zone defense against the run, by nature, you're going to face more pass attempts, and it's going to put a little more strain on your secondary. But I think with Dwayne Akina just being able to get in Terry Joseph's ear, maybe you can get him and Pete Kwiatkowski on the same page. And I do think it's interesting, too, to look at kind of PK's influence and where he's taking this defense. He brought in Payam Sadat last year to kind of help with some of the blitz packages, expand those blitzes a little bit. But Payam Sadat is from the Dick Tomey coaching tree, kind of that desert swarm defense. And Dwayne Akina was a really big part of that at Arizona under Dick Tomey. So you still, from a philosophical standpoint, those two should be somewhat on the same page. There's some relatable things that those two can vibe on a little bit. But I love this move for Texas. Blake Gidding and Terry Joseph have done a really good job recruiting, bringing talent in. But this speaks to also how Sark has looked at problems each of his off seasons and has gone about fixing them. The first year it was the defense as a whole. He brings in Gary Patterson to be the sounding board for everybody. Last year, life without Roshan Johnson and Bijan Robinson, he brings in Paul Christ to help revamp the running game, and Texas produces a 1,000-yard rusher in Jonathan Brooks again. I mentioned Payam Sadat with helping with the blitz packages. Jody Camillus came in to help with game management, and now what was your weakest link, your most underperforming group last year was probably the secondary. Now you bring in Dwayne Akina to help fix that. So a lot of things I just rattled off there, Tommy, to show how positive of a move it is. But I think this is one that Texas fans, it's hard to get Texas fans universally to all agree to something, but I think universally everybody puts their stamp of approval on this one.
The Longhorns have certainly been very surgical with the analysts and the assistants that have been brought in so far in the Sarkisian era. We're going to bring everybody back in here now for the full quad box effect. Guys, today is the last day that players can enter the NFL draft. The last day that Texas players could enter the portal has already passed. So more or less, we've got an idea of what this past quote-unquote off-season has looked like when it comes to transfer moves, both in and out, and who's going, who's staying to the NFL draft. So with everything as a whole now kind of in play, what would you say is the most impactful roster move since the Sugar Bowl, and why? Chip, we'll start with you.
Well, it has to be Quinn Ewers announcing that he's coming back for the 2024 season. The self-awareness, to me, the growth, the fact that he wants to be a more complete quarterback, feels like there's more room to grow instead of just, entering the draft at the first possible, opportunity. And I think that Quinn has, taken charge of his career from that standpoint, that He's going to make the calls on this. He's going to go to the NFL draft when he's ready. And because I think there was some question about whether it was all his idea to leave high school early to be able to accept NIL money in the state of Ohio. So I think that this is big because obviously the more experience you have in the Steve Sarkisian offense, the better off you are. And we've seen that growth from year 1 to year 2 with Quinn Ewers going from being a 58% passer to a 70% passer, his comfortability, but there is still room to grow. And I think that having that tip of the spear position as a 3-year player for Texas gives them a fighting chance going in to the SEC in year 1, because we know that skill players want to come play for Steve Sarkisian. We're seeing it with Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden. To have the quarterback answer, that's big.
Yeah, I'll pick up where Chip left off there. I mean, the obvious answer is Quinn Ewers. Anytime you can get a 2-year starting quarterback, especially someone who is kind of making that career trajectory as Quinn is making, that is certainly a big one. But I'm going to flip it to the defensive side of the ball and go with Jade Baron, because that's one that I think was a little bit unexpected. You take a look, really kind of a kid who had accepted his Senior Bowl invite and kind of trended, about 70-30 leaning towards going to the NFL, but seemingly wasn't getting the love that he was looking for as far as his pre-draft grades and things of that nature. But in terms of what that brings for Texas football, listen, you can ask Steve Sarkisian. He'll tell you, as I asked him earlier this year, just the importance of that star role, that nickelback, that slot corner in today's college football. He says it's huge. That is a position that is highly undervalued. And when you take a look, as Jeff talked about with, the addition of Dwayne Akina and the secondary obviously need to improve a level of play. I mean, you have enough talent in my mind returning on the outside in Terrence Brooks and, Manny Muhammad, possibly the addition of another Muhammad, but that might be another conversation for another time. And then the safety room certainly trending upwards with Derek Williams Jr. and Andrew Makuba. But to me, the person and the player who Steve Sarkisian has called the glue of the secondary, or the defense, excuse me, it's when he kind of ties the front end to the back end together, is Jade Baron. So be able to get him back, 2 years ago, he had over 70 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss. The counting statistics, came down this year, but that doesn't necessarily measure the impact of play. Someone who just, the amount of time he spends in the film room, his read and react, his pre-snap recognition, those are things and that I really think, in my opinion, Tommy, can just rub off on this defense, especially when you lose stalwarts, in the middle, like Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, Jalen Ford. Having a veteran like that who is just clearly respected, a great communicator on that defense, I think it's going to be huge. And in my mind, it really takes the possibility of this defense, should all things come together, really gives them an opportunity to go from being, another good to really good defense to possibly being a great defense.
Yeah, I'll stay on the defensive side of the ball. If I've got to pick a roster move, I'm going to say it's missing on Jamari Caldwell out of the transfer portal. And that just ties into the overall comings and goings on the interior defensive line. I mean, really the main reason why you missed on Jamari Caldwell and why Dontre Robinson, as we sit here and record this, is kind of in limbo with his enrollment status, is Bo Davis taking the LSU job. You got Alfred Collins to come back, which is massive. We knew Vernon Broughton was coming back, but hey, we've known for months now that Byron Murphy wasn't coming back. So they were hoping, I know, to add a defensive tackle through the transfer portal. They felt they had their guy in Caldwell, and Bo Davis leaving kind of threw a monkey wrench in all of that. So I'm not ready to call that position a question mark, but it was the unquestioned strength of this team last year with Sweat and Murphy. Not getting Jamari Caldwell just shrinks your margin for error, to me, significantly, because now instead of having a buffer between your top end guys, and by the way, 2 top end guys that haven't played, really significant roles yet as starters. Both guys have flashed, but can they do it consistently? I think that's a big question mark. But now, instead of having the buffer between those guys and the backups, now you're really going to need a couple of guys from that group of Sadir Mitchell, Jere Bledsoe, Aaron Bryant, Zach Swanson. You're going to get a couple of those guys to step up and become primary rotational players. So it was the unquestioned strength of this defense, the unquestioned strength of this team last year. You just can't have an offseason where you take a significant step back to where that group becomes a question mark, or maybe even something that we're doubting going into SEC play, because I've always said this, and I truly believe it. The SEC is the ultimate line of scrimmage league in college football, and Texas cannot be at a disadvantage in that game. Whether you're talking the SEC or not, because September 7th, you got a trip to Ann Arbor to face the defending national champion. So you want to be as on your game, as on point as possible along the lines of scrimmage. So I'll just be keeping an eye on that interior defensive line group throughout the rest of the offseason.
Well, and just to piggyback on what Jeff just said, Dominic McKinley was interested in Texas, and Bo Davis told Steve Sarkisian to pass on him because he didn't like his motor. And now Dominic McKinley is headed to LSU. So.
Yeah, all really good points there, fellas. I'm going to end back on the offensive side of the ball with Matthew Golden. You know, when I look at the wide receiver room that Steve Sarkisian's built and the wide receiver rooms of Sarkisian's past, he's not afraid to use his skill guys and some of his best players in the special teams game. We saw it with Xavier Worthy and punt returns. Matthew Golden's going to give you that same explosiveness in the return game. He did it really well at Houston last year, brought back 2 touchdowns on special teams. And then at wide receiver, this is a guy that I think could have played in the SEC straight out of high school. So really, really impressed with that pickup for the Longhorns. I think it's a perfect fit. It's going to lead to a lot of exciting moments for Texas in 2024. Still some pending transfer portal moves for the Longhorns, so keep an eye on horns247.com to be up to date with the latest news regarding those and everything else you need to know about Texas athletics as we head into the colder months of the year. It is freezing in Austin right now. So everyone, thanks for watching. Stay warm, and as always, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you're the first to know when new content heads your way. For Jeff, Chip, and Eric, I'm Tommy Yarrish. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.